The first lecture, I talked about pathology being the cellular changes that are the response to the disease. So we're going to talk about in this section some different cellular adaptations that happen. And then when we're characterizing individual diseases, we will use the terminology and the knowledge that we learn in this section to characterize some of the diseases. So the learning objectives are to describe common cellular adaptations and the reason for their occurrence, common causes of cell damage, and differentiate between atrophy, hypertrophy, hyperplasia, anaplasia, and dysplasia. So we got some good terminology in this section too, just like we do with everything. So there's always a ton of terminology. So our little cells, lovely little cells, um, all the cells in our body have most of the cells in our body have the same makeup of DNA that describes us as a human, as an individual human. So each individual differentiated cell has its job, and if the cell is damaged or changed in some way, the job that it does is going to change, right? So cells can adapt their growth and differentiation to altered conditions in the body. So there's certain cells that start out as one thing and then turn into another thing. And we'll talk about all of them in gory, gory detail. It'll be great. You'll love it. So tissues can be modified due to hormonal stimulation or environmental stimulation. And I said, as you might recall in the first lecture, that a lot of our body control systems are endocrine and nervous system control systems. So the endocrine system produces hormones, and that can change cells. The nervous system actually can affect changes in your DNA, which I think is fascinating. And so all of those control systems go to actually controlling our cells. And what are the cells doing? So disease may develop when cell structure and function are changed to the point where homeostasis cannot be maintained. So sure, cells can adapt and change as needed, but when the change gets too crazy, the cells don't work like they're supposed to, and disease develops. Okay. So atrophy, hypertrophy, and hyperplasia are often sort of normal cellular adaptations, not necessarily due to disease processes. Atrophy is a decrease in the size of cells. So smaller cells, they're still the same cells, but they're smaller. It results in a reduced tissue mass. So a good example is you stopped working out at the gym and your muscles get smaller. Atrophy. Hypertrophy is an increase in cell size. It results in an enlarged tissue mass. Sometimes hypertrophy is good. You started working out at the gym and your muscles got bigger. It's good. Sometimes hypertrophy is bad, like cardiac hypertrophy. Your heart muscle is growing because there's increased demand on it because of some disease process. That's not good. So atrophy can be good or bad. Hypertrophy can be good or bad. Hyperplasia is an increased number of cells, reducing in an enlarged tissue mass. So sometimes, and hyperplasia again can be good or bad. So when we talk about different things, so basically atrophy is smaller cells, hypertrophy is larger cells, hyperplasia is more cells. Okay, but their cells are all still normal at this point, hopefully. Here's where it gets ugly. A metaplasia is where a mature cell type is replaced by a different mature cell type. So an example of metaplasia is where if you're a smoker or if you are exposed to other forms of secondhand smoke, the epithelial cells in your respiratory system might change to a different type of cell to be more resistant to that smoke. So it's a mature cell type is replaced by a different mature cell type. Dysplasia is cells varying in size and shape within a tissue. So, dysplasia, here's where stuff starts going bad. Like instead of your normal shape and size of cells, you get weird cells. There's something wrong. Um, and dysplasia is often a precursor to a neoplasm or a growth or a tumor. Anaplasia is undifferentiated cells with variable nuclear and cell structures. So most cells have their normal nucleus and their little cellular mechanisms, mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum and all that cool stuff you learned about in biology. But with dysplastic cells, there might be something wrong with them. Their shape isn't quite right. They don't have all the normal things they need to have. With anaplastic cells, they're undifferentiated. They might have a nucleus, they might not. They might not have all the cellular structures they need. And if they don't, then they can't do their job. And if your cells can't do your job, you can't maintain homeostasis. Dysplasia is often a precursor to neoplasia, which means new growth. It's commonly called a tumor. So we'll talk about different types of tumor in the tumor chapter. Um, but so we have new growth of cells. It's not normal. So none of these are normal. These are the starts of disease processes. So just to look at cell patterns. So the top left side, normal cells. Yay, happy little cells. They have nuclei, they have all their structures and everything. Atrophy, it's the same cells except they're smaller, for whatever reason. Hypertrophy, same cells except they're bigger. Hyperplasia, same cells except there are more of them. Metaplasia is where a mature cell type is replaced by a different cell type. So we have normal cells, atrophy is smaller cells, hypertrophy is larger cells, hyperplasia is more cells, metaplasia is different cells, dysplasia is weird cells, and neoplasia is new growth. There's something wrong. The cells are growing out of control. So there's something wrong with the gene expression. Cancer is a disease of the genes, and neoplasia is a manifestation of that. Anaplasia is undifferentiated immature cells. So if you think of it, normal cells, more cells, bigger cells, more cells, different cells, and weird cells. That's my classification. So remember which one goes with which. Different types of cell damage. Apoptosis, some people say it apoptosis because they say ptosis is the root word and apo is the prefix, but I like apoptosis because it's onomatopoetic. It sort of describes what happens to the cell. It's a programmed cell death, which is a normal occurrence in the body. So a good example of this is when when we're babies, we have tons of neurons, way more than we end up with in the mature nervous system. And the how we use our nervous system sculpts and defines our maturing nervous system, and the cells we don't need die off. The body's just thought, I don't need these, and they die off. And the process by which they die off is called apoptosis or apoptosis, if you prefer. As far as pronunciation goes, I don't care how you pronounce things as long as you know what they are and can know how to spell them for the most part. Ischemia is a deficit of oxygen in the cells. Okay, our cells function by aerobic metabolism in general. They can do anaerobic for a little while, but they can't do it forever. We're aerobic organisms. So if there's a deficit of oxygen in the cells, that is going to affect their function. Hypoxia is reduced oxygen in the tissues. So you can think of ischemia as there's maybe the blood supply is being restricted, so you're not getting new oxygen into the cells. Hypoxia is actual reduced oxygen perfusion in the tissues. And it may be caused by nutritional deficits. And so the poor old cells are really struggling at this point. Pyroptosis is cell lysis caused by nearby inflammation. So the inflammation is what causes the death of cells rather than a pre-programmed cell death as in apoptosis. Lots of things can cause cell damage. Physical damage, like excessive heat or cold, or exposure to radiation, including ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Mechanical damage, like pressure or tearing of tissue. Chemical toxins, either exogenous toxins from the environment or endogenous toxins from the inside of your body. So you can have cell damage from your own endogenous chemical toxins. Nice. Microorganisms can cause cell damage. So bacteria and viruses, both of them, bacteria form colonies and they take up resources and space and they can damage your cells. Viruses actually use the mechanisms of your cells and then they burst forth from the cell, breaking it into pieces, and so they damage your cells. Abnormal metabolites. So metabolites are chemical, so this would be endogenous chemicals basically. There are chemicals that are produced by cellular metabolism. So if you have abnormal ones, there's some genetic disorders like fetal ketonuria that cause abnormal metabolites that then cause problem in other cells. Inborn errors of metabolism or altered metabolism because of disease like diabetes mellitus or other disease processes. Imbalances of fluids or electrolytes can cause cell damage. And in the second chapter, we're going to talk about that. And it's very interesting. Necrosis is when dying cells cause further cell damage due to cellular disintegration. So when cells start to die, they start to release all their chemicals and everything into the area, and they can damage other cells around them. So that's an example of endogenous chemical toxins destroying the cells around it. So there are different kinds of necrosis, and there's some really gross pictures that go with it. So liquefaction necrosis is where the dead cells liquefy because of the release of cell enzymes. So cell enzymes are going to break down the cells around them, and it liquefies the dead cells. Coagulative necrosis is where the cell proteins are altered or denatured, and they actually coagulate. Fat necrosis is where fatty tissue is broken down into fatty acids, and that can cause deterioration of the tissues around it. Caseous necrosis is a form of coagulation necrosis, and it has a thick yellow, described as cheesy substance. So this picture is a picture of caseous necrosis, which that doesn't look normal, and it's not. It's cell death. This is a picture of liquefaction necrosis in the brain. Not good. This is coagulative necrosis in the kidney. The area of dead cells that results from oxygen deprivation is called an infarction. So when you have a heart attack, it's a myocardial infarction where cells die because of oxygen deprivation. When you have a cerebrovascular accident, you get a brain infarction where cells die because of oxygen deprivation. If an area of necrotic tissue has been invaded by bacteria, that is known as gangrene. If you have gangrene, that part needs to be excised. So people get amputations from gangrene because you don't want the bacteria to invade surrounding tissues. You don't want it to get it into your bloodstream and have it cause sepsis or systemic problems. So bad things can happen to cells. And we'll talk about them for the next 2 quarters.